You're listening to Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay. This is a program called
The Wonderful World of Wardini Books.
And as always, it's my pleasure to have in the studio with me the wonderful Lou from Wardini Books in Havelock North. How has your week been?
It's been good, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to believe where the time has gone. That long weekend puts you out, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a day ahead. I kept thinking it was Friday today.
Yeah, but you would have been flat out.
Yeah, it's been all right. Yeah.
That's good.
And there's still those freight issues, so you're getting no stock, and then you're getting all of the stock. So it's feast or famine at the moment.
I love it. Anyway, we've got three fabulous books to review this week, and this one I've seen advertised on the internet, on the interweb, and it's called Gangland. It's about Kiwis.
It is. So it's by Jared Savage, who's a journalist, and it's New Zealand's underworld of organised crime. I thought, oh, that sounds quite interesting, so I picked it up, and it's one of those that you just rip through and you're like, oh my goodness, okay. There's some real bad guys out there, Ken. Mostly there was only one woman that... Oh, no, there were a couple of women that turned up, but it is mostly blokes. So it is really about that. Yes, we've had gangs, but they used to fight among themselves, and, you know, it was turf wars and tribalism and that kind of thing. But and then they used to deal a bit of dope and, you know, that kind of thing. And then it really is the methamphetamine explosion. So it actually starts with... Chinese criminals coming in and importing. It was the ingredients to make methamphetamine to begin with. So it's that pseudoephedrine that you can get in your cold and flu remedies. And they would have particular people that would go around buying it up once the law was introduced that you could only buy it over the counter and only in small amounts, you know, and then they would get the ephedrine that they needed for the methamphetamine from the pseudoephedrine. Anyway, that's all the sciencey bits. But just the most ordinary people that ended up being excellent meth cooks. You know, it's chemistry, it's quite hard. And they've done it. So it sort of went from that, importing ingredients, to now where the whole thing is made overseas and imported. And it's gone from those Chinese connections to then when the law was passed in Australia that anyone who was actually a Kiwi, even though they might have lived there their whole life, got kicked back here for offences, then we've got all the other gangs, the Australian gangs coming in, so your headhunters, king cobras, comancheros, and then, you know, they're not just going to go and work at somewhere and be good. They're looking for opportunities, and it's a massive opportunity because meth is huge in this country.
I know it is. Yeah. How historical is the book? I mean, is it the last 20, 30 years, or does it go further back than that?
I think it's a bit further back than that, but it is really the birth of pea in New Zealand. I'll see if I can find dates for you, but it's not that long ago. Sort of 1996 is where he's starting.
It's pretty current then.
Yeah, so, I know, but that's because we're old, but that is sort of, you know, it's cracking on for 30 years ago, isn't it? 25, 30 years. So, yeah, and now Mexican cartels muscling in as well. But in this tiny country, because... meth is more, you can flog it for more here than you can anywhere else in the world. So although we're a small population, there's a big profit to be made.
I wonder what will happen to the drug trade in particular when it becomes, and I think it will happen, that we become a cashless society.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's another thing, like when they've raided people's houses and they're like, oh no, I've had nothing to do with it. You've got $500,000 in cash under your mattress.
Yeah, that's right.
Where's that come from? What are you doing with that?
Exactly
the amounts of money are staggering. And there's a whole chapter on that. Do you remember in Kaitaia a few years back that there was like that dinghy that sort of washed upon the beach, and then they did like I think it was like a 500 kilo meth bust or something. It was just ridiculous amounts of meth coming in.
Yes, sadly, well, fortunately, it's an industry we will never know the inside of.
I really
except
hope
through books.
Not. Yeah, but it was enlightening. Yeah.
Good read. Now, what do you rate it out of 10?
For engagement, you know, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I've read it in a couple of nights. It was like, my God, this is just... Because it is like... And he's a good writer, Jared Savage, and I think Steve Braunius has knocked it into shape for him, as he puts it in the back. It reads... He says things like, you know, you picture the scene, it's a million drug bust films, you know, the white shirt rolled up to, you know, and they're like, right, okay, we've got nothing to go on, let's go get them, guys, you know, and there are scenes like that in the book.
And I imagine it'd be popular because we like that underbelly, don't we? We like getting into the dirty side of life without actually having to be part of it.
I think that's it, because most of us just run along at a normal sort of decent level. We have a certain moral standard, you know. We might not recycle all the time, but we're pretty decent people. And then you're like, my God, the lives people live. And then they go to prison for 27 years.
Yeah, and they wonder why.
What was the point of that?
Yeah. Tell us about Victory Park.
Yeah, let's move on. So this is another New Zealand book by Rachel Kerr, And this is a long lister for the Ockham New Zealand Book Awards. So that the long list just come out. So this is, they call it our finest. So a group of people have sat around and thought, this is a brilliant book. I also thought it was a really good book. So in Victory Park, I don't know if that's a real place in Wellington or a fictional estate in Wellington, but it's an estate in Wellington. And so it's a novel, this one. And Cara is a single mother. Her husband died back in the day, and she's got an older girl who's just left home, and then she's got a 4-year-old just turning 5, just going to start school. And she looks after other people's kids to make ends meet. And she's a good sort, and she's really good with the kids and makes a big effort. And there's sort of this, you don't know if she's got asthma or what's going on with her at the start, but the older girl is always saying, Mum, you need to go and get that checked out. She's like, yeah, I will. But of course it's expensive to go to the doctor, and she's not got a lot of money. And then this very glamorous character called Bridget moves into the flat next door, and they're just small, slightly crummy flats, salt of the earth type, working class people. And turns out that Bridget's was a very rich woman. She even turns up to the estate in her flash Audi, and she's got a little boy about the same age as Cara's little boy, and it's called Rafe.
Yes, nice name.
And her husband, Bridget's husband, was responsible for this Ponzi scheme that's just ripped off loads of people, and all their money's been frozen, assets have been frozen. So she's run off and she's come to live in this crummy flat next door to Cara. So it's about really what it takes to be a decent person in the world, and responsible, and it's sort of blowing some stereotypes out of the water, that people who live in poverty are all a bit rubbish, which is not true. I don't know where you grew up, but I grew up in a very working class area.
Same here.
And we turned out all right, didn't we?
Didn't we? Yes.
And it's just really good exploration of relationships and people having their priorities right. And Bridget's a bit of a spoilt so-and-so, really, so she gets a few home truths, and Cara is sort of taken in by the glamour of Bridget, but who turns out to be the one that's got you back at the end of the day.
There's a moral in there.
There really is, yeah. And also I think that Cara's health issues become sort of more apparent as you go through the book.
Who's going to read that book?
It's a good one for book clubs. It's a good one for anyone interested in looking at why these books are chosen for prizes, or to be up for prizes. Anyone that's really interested in just those everyday New Zealand stories. Yeah. Are you
ever surprised when a book comes up to get an immense award like that? Do you ever think to yourself, wow, how did that get picked?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. But this year's list actually is a cracker of a list. So I'm really looking forward to chugging through the long list, and then I'll definitely read all the short listers when they come out later on in the year. But sometimes you read it and you go, what?
Really? Yeah.
Is this the political reason that this is in here? I don't know.
I suppose it's like art, isn't it?
It's very subjective.
Yes, indeed. And tell us about Lucky's.
Oh, this is just lovely. It's just one of those beautiful books. This is an Australian author, Andrew Pipos. He's an Australian-Greek young man. He's a journalist too, and this is his first novel. And in this one, we start off in the Second World War in Australia, where you've got American GIs over there doing, I don't even know what they're doing. And Lucky Malios, his name is. He is an American Greek guy who's posted in Sydney with one of his mates, and he and the mate are quite bored in the war. They've not got a lot to do in Sydney, and the mate says, "You look quite like Benny Goodman, and you play the clarinet. Let's go on tour." And the mate sets up this tour where Lucky pretends to be Benny Goodman, and they kind of get away with it to a certain extent, but they're going to go into this place and play a concert, and then the military police come and arrest them. And long story short, when he eventually goes and plays a gig as Benny Goodman, he meets the Australian Greek girl who's going to be his future wife. He also meets a strange Englishman who's completely fallen for the con and thinks he is Benny Goodman. And he'll come back to haunt us later, Ian Asquith. And he meets Valia, his future wife, and Valia's father is this really interesting, funny character called Achilles. Oh, I can't remember his surname. It's quite a complicated Greek surname. And he's got a cafe called the Achillean. And it's very popular, but Achilles is a right grumpy, strange man. He's quite kind of unhinged. And eventually what happens is Lucky takes over the cafe, and he sets up a chain of cafes. And then in the modern days, Emily who is in the UK as a journalist, and her marriage has crumbled and her job has crumbled, and she pitches a story about the Lucky's chain of cafes to the New Yorker, and they say, okay, you know, you can run with this. So off she goes to Australia and she interviews Lucky, who now has no cafes. The last cafe that he had was a Lucky's, and there was a mass shooting there, and then that was the end of it. So she's investigating what happened right from the First World War right through to the present day, and where all the Lucky's chains went, because they were quite the iconic brand, you know.
Page Turner?
Page Turner, beautiful characters. Lucky himself is just the most darling character. It's wonderful. And then what's Ian Asquith got to do with it, because he crops up later as well. And beautiful family saga.
Sounds like a 10.
Yeah, definitely. I put it down and I thought, oh, I want to read it again, or I want to know what happens next with Lucky. You know, he's a lovely bloke.
Good on you, Lou. If we want to get into these fabulous books, where do we get them?
Wardini Books, that would be nice.
Of course. You look after yourself. We'll talk to the same time, same place next week.
Thanks, Ken.